How broken is Pac-Man World 2 Repack on the Nintendo Switch, if it's even broken at all? Well, I played the game for several hours and I have my opinion, and it might not be what you're expecting. So for those of you who like 3D platformers and, you know, this little Pac-Man guy, you'll probably be somewhat interested in this game. Thankfully, I'm one of those two people. In fact, I'm both of those two people that I just described. I like 3D platformers and Pac-Man. So already this seems kind of perfect for me. This game immediately caught my eye, and not just because it's like visually stunning, like, you know, Cocoa Melon visual colors, but I also really liked the first Pac-Man World Repack game. So before I get into how broken it is on the Nintendo Switch, let me talk about my experience with the game first. And I want to tell you how I like it, if the game's even worth getting in the first place, let alone on the Nintendo Switch. And then we can go from there. I think that's a good idea. I just shook my own hand. So like I mentioned, this is a remake of the original Pac-Man World 2 from 2002. Oh my goodness, the year I was born. That's like 23 years. Holy smokes. Time flies when you're having fun or playing Pac-Man. So when you're having fun. I was really excited to play this Pac-Man World 2 game because I had heard that this Pac-Man World game is better than even the first one, and especially the third one. So it's always been on my backlog to finish Pac-Man World 2, or even test it out. And I even got the GameCube version like a few years ago, shortly after I played the Pac-Man World Repack on my Nintendo Switch. So it was locked and loaded. It was on my backlog. So when they announced this game in a partner direct, I was like, oh, that looks good. And I've always been somewhat of a Pac-Man fan. You know, I played the classic arcade game so many times on my Game Boy Advance growing up, and I have the fondest memories of Mr. Waka himself. And even in the last like 5 years, this Pac-Man IP has kind of like blossomed in its own way. Like you got this Pac-Man design literally in Super Smash Bros, you know, since Smash Bros 4. And I think that's actually really where my Pac-Man love started to blossom. The fact that he was in Smash Bros, they're finally making some new games. They're getting a little bit experimental. Even this year with the Shadow Labyrinth game, like that was a crazy game. It was weird. So I'm actually really happy that they're going back and remaking these 3D platformers, because I think that Pac-Man needs a little bit more representation on modern platforms. Now, I don't know if this game does the best job of doing that, but there are many pros and cons. But first of all, I got to tell you about my experience of the first Repack game on the Nintendo Switch 1, because it was kind of bad, and it's mostly the Nintendo Switch's fault. So I played the Repack 1 game back on the Nintendo Switch, like launch day. I did a full video on my main channel about it back in the day when I was bad at YouTube. And it was an okay experience. It was pretty decent. It's not super memorable, the first game. Like, I just don't remember that much of it. Like, the levels were fine, but they were so bland in a way. It was fun in the moment, but it quickly went through the back of my head like most things. But the performance and the graphics on the Nintendo Switch was kind of where I think the game struggled the most for me. It was 30 frames per second most of the time, which if you've played a 3D platformer at 30 frames per second, you know that that's just not ideal, and it's actually pretty janky most of the time. It feels laggy. Having some precision jumps, which is, you know, ideal in a 3D platformer, just, you know, didn't work out that well. It wasn't that good. But on the Nintendo Switch, I also remember that there was like this hidden performance mode, which I needed to play, and thank goodness I found it, because having that extra frame rate was really helpful. But even in that performance mode, it would like lag a ton. It would always have some frame rate hitches, and I think that's kind of what stunted my experience for the first Repack game. So the fact that Repack 2 is now on the Nintendo Switch 2, I had hopes for this. I had a feeling that this was going to be a much better experience, much better gameplay, and all that stuff. So let me actually talk about the game now. Anyways, my core experience, the platforming, the controls, the movement, the level flow. How did I like it? How was it? Well, as soon as the game opened up, I thought it felt really good. It was in 60 frames per second, locked, and you could instantly tell the difference from the first Pac-Man World game to the second one. It felt a little bit more polished. Pac-Man's got some new like kick move. He's got the classic Pac-Man booty bounce, if that's what you want to call it. And the platforming and the controls just felt a lot tighter and more fine-tuned, especially compared to the first one. I also think the camera, I really think the camera is a lot better in this game and makes the field of view a lot kind of wider, or easier to platform. I don't know if that's just me or maybe they're the same, but I really found that the camera, being an open camera and moving everywhere, was really helpful. The movement also seems a lot faster, and Pac-Man seems a little more squishy, which, you know, I have no problem with some squishness. The general level flow is, you know, you go through this 3D platformer. It's pretty linear. You can jump, you can attack enemies. Like I said, Pac-Man's got this new kick to hit enemies, but the main objective seems to be getting a bunch of fruit. There is a certain amount of certain fruit in the level, and you got to go and find as much fruit as you possibly can. Then there will be chests that says, okay, if you have 3 of 3 fruits, I'll give you something else. And the game rewards you by going through each level and collecting every single fruit. This is a very big collectathon, even more than I expected. There is a lot of fruits to collect. There is a lot in each of these levels to go back and collect. And you can actually spend a lot longer on a level than what I thought going in. And for a 3D platformer like this, having collectibles, especially collectibles that do something, are very welcomed. Speaking of collectibles outside of even the levels, like the fruit, you can also get these figurines that you can collect, and that's really cool. There are a lot of figurines, and there's even costumes that you can play and use on the good old Pac-Man here. Some levels have some unique gimmicks, like using Pac-Man's butt bounce to jump on these fans and go super high in the air, and you can try to platform across these fans. There's also the Pac-Man maze mechanic, where if you find a pellet, you can actually get big with that pellet and try and fight it, get a bunch of these ghosts, and then you'll get rewarded for it at the end with like a life or a certain fruit. You can use your rev roll, so you can actually charge up and then boost yourself by rolling, which is actually a really good mechanic, and they use it a lot with like ramps, and you gotta ramp yourself to the other platform. It's cool. I like it. They even pull a lot of ideas from other games, like there's like an avalanche, and it kind of reminds me of the Crash Bandicoot or Indiana Jones boulder rolling towards you. There's parts where Pac-Man can get really small and go in between cracks like a little baby mouse, and it's a good time. I would say these levels are a lot more memorable than even the first game, because they're a lot more dynamic and there's more going on, it seems. There's also some pretty decent boss battles that can get pretty challenging, but the fact that I even died is like crazy for a first world boss. And yeah, this game can actually get surprisingly challenging, so babies be warned. They added quite a few things to this new repack game compared to the first game as well. Like, you got voice acting. Apparently that wasn't in the second the game, like the original game. And honestly, I don't really think it should have been in this game. The voice acting isn't like horrible, and I don't like throwing shade at people who can do things better than me. Like, I'm not a voice actor, so how can I critique voice acting? You know what I mean? I think there's like a fine line of what makes sense for the voice acting, and I really didn't like the voice acting in this game. Most of the lines are very cheesy, very child focused. Some jokes really don't land at all. Like, Pac-Man is fighting this frog boss, and he says, "I think I have a frog in my throat." Like, my guy, you don't have a throat. What are you talking about? You literally just said that because it was the only frog pun you could think of. The writers were really not locked in when they were writing the lines. I don't think voice acting was really necessary, and I could ramble about this for quite a while. I also just don't think Pac-Man should have a voice. Mario doesn't have a voice, really. Like, full voice lines. Link doesn't have full voice lines. Pac-Man should not have full-blown voice lines. Sonic, I think, is the one exception. Sonic is really built on that voice actor and all that stuff. He's just a cheeky guy, but Pac-Man is literally a yellow dot that eats pellets. There's no world where I think Pac-Man should be talking and saying that he has a frog in his throat. Like, what are you talking about, my guy? Holy smokes. I was more passionate about that than I expected going into this. Anyways, I don't like the voice actor. I'm sure he's a great guy on his own. I just don't know if it really fits this game like they intended. It's kind of cheesy, to be honest. Everyone else can have voices, they're just not Pac-Man. You know what I mean? There's some new missions in this game, new modes. They added co-op, which I didn't really test out, but they added co-op, so that's good. I think this game kind of suffers from something that the first game suffered with. These levels are a little more memorable and the stages are nice, but it's still pretty, I don't know, it's still pretty lacking in the memorable department. It's definitely more memorable, but still just kind of bland in some ways. And I haven't fully completed the game, and maybe I should, but like in comparison to other 3D platformers, this is just a pretty safe one, I would say. But now let's talk about the Nintendo Switchness of it. What are the Switch quirks? Well, I played this on the Nintendo Switch 2 primarily. I have the Switch 2 version, but I got some stats that I'd like to share. about the Switch 1 version as well. First of all, the Switch 2 version. So this game does have a Nintendo Switch 2 edition. Thankfully, there's a lot of games coming out that don't have Switch 2 edition still. It's kind of insane. But this uses the Nintendo Switch 2's power, which I appreciate. But still, it's not using the power in the, like, I don't think it's fully optimized for the Switch 2 yet, because this game, and I love it, can run at 60 frames per second, which is great, but it's locked at around 1080p. You can also play the game in 4K and 30 frames per second, but this is a platformer, and as I said, you need that precision for a platformer. So I, of course, stayed with 1080p 60 frames per second. I did play a little bit of the game in 4K 30 frames per second. I played a full level, so if you've seen some of the gameplay here and it's 30 frames per second, that's the 4K stuff. The thing is, even in 4K mode, it's really not worth that extra sharpness, because there's not, many graphical things that are in this game. Like, there's no crazy textures, there's no assets that have been added to the resolution mode. Like, this is a pretty basic, colorful, low textured game that really doesn't benefit from being played in 4K 30 over 1080p 60. Like, it's just not worth it. The gameplay experience is so much better in 60 frames per second. On the Nintendo Switch 1, apparently you don't even get that option. I haven't actually booted it on the Nintendo Switch 1, but from what I've heard, the game only plays at 1080p 30 frames per second. You might be able to get something above 30 frames per second in like a performance mode, but I would assume that it's kind of like Pac-Man World Repack 1, which I played in their quote-unquote performance mode, which was very laggy, not worth sacrificing like I don't know. I guess it is worth sacrificing the resolution, but the frame rate kind of hitches a lot more than if you just didn't, which can be sometimes even worse than a solid 30, you know what I mean? But yeah, there's really no reason in my mind that says this game wouldn't have been able to run at 4K 60 frames per second on the Switch 2. Like, it is such a bare bones visually game that I can't see why it wouldn't have been able to run. Like, I'm not a game developer or anything, but I mean, Mario Kart is much more visually stunning, and that runs at 4K 60. Now, you could say they just didn't want to really optimize it for the Nintendo Switch, which I get, but I mean, this is like a 3D mascot platformer. I'm just surprised they weren't able to get it run that high, is all. It's not really a deal breaker, but when you look at like the PlayStation version, that can run 4K 60. Like, it's not a very intense game. Now, one of the best things about this game is the price. It's only $30, which is really good for a 3D platformer, and for the amount of replayability this game has, with you going back and collecting all the fruits, all the unlockables, and just the quality of it. Like, this seems like it could have been a $40 or $50 game, but no, they gave it to us for $30 on all platforms, including the Switch 1 and the Switch 2, which I gotta give them applause for. Not many people are doing this, especially for such a big name like Pac-Man, and with the price increase of literally every single thing going up. I think that's great that it's only $30, and that almost makes me recommend it even more. If you are not in the mood or don't want to spend double the price, if not more, on any other 3D platformer, this is actually a really decent experience. It's not super long if you're not going for everything. I'd say like 5 to 7 hours, but it's a good experience for $30, which makes it very difficult to nitpick a lot of the things I'm talking about. Yes, I could talk about voice acting, and yes, I could talk about not running it at 1080p 60 frames per second, but the value you're getting with this game is a lot better than a lot of other modern games we've seen, especially from Nintendo. So to answer the question, how broken is it? I mean, not really at all. There were a couple glitches here and there when I was in a boss fight, and it just kind of glitched out, but it worked itself out. The 4K mode does have a couple of frame hitches, and it's just not worth playing. And I even saw a little bit in the performance mode, but really nothing crazy. Maybe once or twice. So I wouldn't say that this is even broken. This passes. I'd be really interested to know if they're going to do a Pac-Man World 3, but I doubt it. I think this game would be really good for a kid. I think if I was like 4 or 5 and I wanted a 3D platformer, this would be really good. I think it'd be a really good game. I wouldn't see a lot of these flaws, and it's really geared towards younger kids, I think. So anyways, that was my Pac-Man World 2 thoughts, impressions, and how broken it is, which we've learned is not that much. So if you like this video or this channel, or if you're new, consider liking and subscribing if you want to do that. It's free, so you can. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one. See you later.